News. Andrew Scheer is, of course, leader of the Conservative Party. He joins us now from Regina. Hi, Mr. Scheer. Thanks for making time for us.
You bet. Good afternoon.
I want to start off just by asking you, because the minister and other ministers have raised the prospect of the House coming back in order to vote on some of what was proposed today. Do you know, or do you have any kind of timeline of when that might happen?
We're in discussions with the government. We've indicated our support for that. We believe that in this time frame, when people are going through the hardship in real time, that Parliament has to react very quickly. We don't yet have an exact date on that, but the impressions we've been given from all the other parties, including the government, is that there's a willingness to do this very quickly. So we're going to continue to be cooperative in those efforts to get Parliament back so that we can take the necessary steps to get assistance directly into the hands of Canadians who are going through so much hardship right now.
Let's talk about the assistance that was proposed by the government today. Basically $27 billion, as they put it, in direct help for Canadians, another $55 billion in tax deferrals. What is your initial impression of the package they announced?
Well, Conservatives are always supportive of measures that will put money right in the hands of Canadians. So there's a lot here that we think will help. We are going through some of the finer details. Of course, it's our job to make sure that we provide that oversight. We're also going to be asking questions about some people who may, fall through the cracks, or that this package doesn't adequately reach, as well as we have some additional measures that we'd like to propose. For example, some of the assistance that was announced previously in terms of loans for small businesses. Right now, those loans are subject to interest rates that start off at 5%. That could be a big burden for small businesses to add on to any existing debt load that they're carrying. So we're going to be asking questions about whether or not there's a capacity to address that, as well as making sure that people who had shifts canceled, people who are in precarious work or who don't have regular hours will be able to access some of these programs as well.
Let me just parse that out a little bit. When you started off, you said people that it might not adequately reach. Specifically, who would you be referring to there?
Well, as we're going through the details of this announcement, that's the lens we're looking at it through, to say, okay, this is, people who qualify for GST rebates will be receiving extra supplement, people who qualify for the child tax benefit. But remember, those qualifications, people who meet those thresholds, are based on last year's income statement. So we've seen some catastrophic drops in revenue, both on the individual side for people as well as for small businesses. So they may be in a situation where they will qualify for that next year because they've gone through such hardship already, but that they won't be showing up on the government's register for qualifying based on last year's numbers. So those are the types of things that we're looking through it. We're going to be proposing solutions as we identify them to the government, so that next week, when Parliament does come back, we can be as comprehensive as possible, recognizing that this is a very fluid situation, that there will likely need to be adjustments made depending on how long this crisis lasts.
Yeah, let me ask you about the fluidity of that situation. And I had the minister on a little bit earlier asking Minister Blair about whether this is, as I think some of the members of the government said, almost a first step. Are you supportive, as leader of the Conservative Party, of additional money going out the door, if necessary, going forward?
Well, let me first say that this is an unprecedented situation, and Conservatives always believe that the government should be there for emergency situations, for when people are in hardship through no fault of their own, and that is what we're dealing with here. Small businesses, restaurants, they've been ordered not to open. So there's a lot of people going through hardship, not because they made a poor decision, but because they are really victims of a global pandemic. So we absolutely do support the government being there. I do take issue with some of the things that the finance minister said about the capacity that the government has to respond. Remember, we're entering into this crisis with massive deficits, with much reduced capacity to act. And so we've been critical of the government's deficits for the past 4 or 5 years, because we do believe that the government should be paying down debt when times are good, so that when a crisis like this hits, we have maximum flexibility to react. But in general, we want to help people. We recognize that people have had shifts canceled, that their businesses have been closed, and they're worried about rent payments and mortgage payments and utility payments. So we do want to see the government step in this time of emergency.
Let me just, if you don't mind, play devil's advocate for a second, because on that issue of fiscal capacity, that is something that we've heard quite often from the federal government. I know that your party has taken issue with the sort of level of the deficit over the past few years. They do insist that their debt to GDP ratio is the lowest of the G7. That's not wrong. They do end up, even according to the PBO, have up to $40 billion of wiggle room. This might end up surpassing that, to be fair, but they do have that wiggle room. Even the PBO says it. Are they really wrong?
Well, here's what we're going to experience, where they like to point to this relative term of debt to GDP, but GDP is going to shrink drastically. So that number is going to spike. Who knows how high it'll go as this crisis goes on. What I can tell you in real dollars, they've added tens of billions of dollars to the deficit, to the national debt. That is reduced capacity. If they hadn't been running deficits for the past 4 or 5 years, we would have even more latitude to help people. We're in the early days of this crisis. Just last week, the government was saying that they weren't going to restrict travel, and they weren't going to close borders. Now they are. So this is obviously an escalating situation, and we're already talking about $85 billion worth of government spending, and it's needed, and it's going to help people, and so we're going to be supportive of that. But this is why messages around fiscal responsibility are so important.
Doesn't, though, sometimes fiscal responsibility, and I'm not in any way taking away from the concept, but I look, for example, to Alberta right now that did make some of those spending decisions. And as a result, they're having to reverse them now because they would have decreased capacity, let's say, in the healthcare sector. Sometimes when you make those decisions in the name of fiscal responsibility, you end up with diminished capacity to fight something like the pandemic we're seeing right now.
Well, we were very prescriptive with where we thought the government was spending money unwisely. And, we put that forward, and we have been doing that. Right now, it's important to remember those types of things, those lessons in the past to help guide us in the future. Here we are today now in the world in which we live. So we are going to be supportive of measures to help Canadians get through this difficult time. We can have those conversations about what to do when things return to normal. One of the things that we are going to be focused on is to ensure that these are measures that are targeted during this time of crisis and perhaps some period of time afterwards, as people might suffer from the effects of this beyond when the pandemic no longer poses a threat. There will still be long-lasting economic repercussions. But we want to make sure the government's response is very targeted to this period of time, to things that are related to this pandemic and the government directives that have flowed from it.